We are going to formally start the program, and I welcome Steve Younger, Chair of the Historical Society of the New York Courts, and a partner at Patterson Belknap. Steve, welcome and thank you so much. This program is due in large part to your involvement, to your chairmanship of this organization, and your suggestion to me 5 years ago when I was president of the Puerto Rican Bar Association, that you said, Betty, it's time. It's time that you tell your story, that we tell this story. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, and God bless you. So now everybody, Steve Younger.
Well, on behalf of the Historical Society and my firm, Patterson Belknap, let me just say, Boricua. I must say, watching all those photos makes me feel melancholic. I can't wait for the day we can get back together and greet each other and have wonderful drinks together and maybe do a little dancing to that wonderful music. And I just want to say the goal of the Historical Society is to help preserve the rich history we have here in New York, both among our lawyers and our judges. And this is particularly the case among Latino lawyers and judges. You've so added to that beautiful fabric of our legal history. And it's really our pleasure and privilege to have this event. We're so fortunate that so many pillars of our institutions are still with us and can share their memories, can share their understanding, because it wasn't always, I mean, it's still difficult, but it wasn't always so easy to be a lawyer of color in our state. I think we all recognize much more profoundly what it's like to experience things, you know, like implicit bias and not being a part of the mainstream culture that other lawyers sort of had a pass on. So it's our great privilege to share this evening. I feel like an honorary member of the Puerto Rican Bar, and I'm so glad to count Betty as one of my good friends, and we're so pleased to host this event with you and with so many other sponsors. We had just a wonderful list of co-sponsors tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve. And Steve is very humble, and that's what I love about him. He grew up in the Lower East Side. He says Lower East Side. So technically, he is an adopted Puerto Rican. He was our honoree at the Puerto Rican Bar Association Scholarship Gala when I was the president back in 2016. He's always said presente. He has always been committed to diversity in the profession, and I applaud Steve. He was past president of the New York State Bar Association, where he increased diversity in the New York State Bar Association, and he continues to work in that regard. You know, I really appreciate Steve, and I appreciate John Halloran. I have to thank John Halloran, also my classmate from Albany Law School, also a former trustee of the Historical Society of the New York Courts. Justice Carmen Ciparick, who we will be hearing from soon, is a former chair, who's chair emeritus of the Historical Society of the New York Courts. But let me just pause and thank Justice Judith K. Without Justice Judith K, the Historical Society would not exist. The Historical Society of the New York Courts was founded in 2002 by the New York State Chief Judge, Judith S. K. Its mission is to preserve, protect, and promote the legal history of New York, including the proud heritage of its court and the development of the rule of law. The Society promotes its mission through educational outreach to New York State students and public programs and publications on these themes, which inform our knowledge and role as citizens today. The Historical Society of the New York Court supports its programs through contributions. It is a not-for-profit organization. It receives foundation, it receives grants. But I am so thankful to the Historical Society of the New York Courts, to its executive director, Marilyn Marcus, who's a dear friend and is doing a wonderful job leading this organization and taking it to the next level. To your staff, Daniel Sierra, Allison Morrissey, Jill Shukin, thank you so much. What a team, what a fabulous team to work with, to give this program the pride and respect that it so merits. And I thank all of you for joining us, because this is the beginning of many programs to follow. Thank you to all the participating organizations who join us tonight. Latino Justice Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund, the Cafecito Network, which is the Latina attorneys, the Puerto Rican Bar Association, Historic Committee, Historic Preservation Committee, Judiciary Committee, the Dominican Bar Association, the Latino Lawyers of Queens County, the Long Island Hispanic Bar Association, the, I have to add, the Caribbean American Lawyers Association, newly formed organization. Watch them. They're going to do great things. And to my other partners who are not here, but have always been my friends, the Jewish Lawyers Guild, the Metropolitan Black Bar Association, to the Korean American lawyers, to the Haitian American lawyers, to all of the diverse bar associations. This is part of your story. And that's why it's so important that we tell it. Tonight, you will hear the story of perseverance, of the beginning of when Puerto Ricans came here and formed the Puerto Rican Bar Association. When they formed the Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund. You will hear from Justice Carmen Ciparick, former Chair Emeritus of the Historical Society, the first Hispanic to serve on the New York State Court of Appeals, and who currently is of counsel to Greenberg Traurig and is still actively involved in mentoring young people and getting people to enter the profession and diversify the profession. You will hear from Cesar Perales, the former Secretary of State, and you will also hear who founded the Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund, and you will hear from Justice Alalisa Torres in the first segment. Now, let me just do a little point of order. Usually, we do sing the national anthem, and we sing the Puerto Rican national anthem. But in the interest of the program, because our speakers are so vast and they have so much information to share, we're going to share that time and let them speak. So without further ado, let me introduce to you Justice Carmen A. Ciparick, Carmen B. Ciparick, Beauchamp Ciparick, the first Puerto Rican woman appointed to be a judge in New York. And I remember she was the one that inspired me to go to law school. When I first saw her that she was appointed in 1978, the Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund, run then by Cesar Perales, had an event, a law day, and I saw her on a panel and I said, Mom, there's a Puerto Rican woman who's a judge. I want to be a lawyer. And that's my inspiration. And that's why I tell this story. So Justice Carmen Ciparick, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for taking the time and to tell your story. So please tell us about your journey. Tell us about the wonderful beginnings of the Puerto Rican bar and the reason you're in that photograph with the original Latino judges.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Betty, for the warm invitation and introduction. And I'm very happy to be here. I welcome the opportunity to share with you a little bit about my life and career. I first want to say hats off to the earlier speakers, my former colleague, Lucindo Suarez, a colleague on the Supreme Court, and of course, Al Placeres, who did work on my 1982 campaign, and we did walk those streets and we did give out flyers, and thank you so much, Al, and it's good to see you. I will focus on my career from my personal perspective as a Puerto Rican woman and a New Yorker. My parents came to New York early on. They came to New York in 1929. Not a good year anywhere. My story is not unlike many of yours. I'm part of that great mosaic that is New York. I came along after the Great Depression and grew up in Washington Heights in Upper Manhattan, attending both parochial schools and public schools. I attended Hunter College, then tuition-free Hunter College, trained to be a teacher, but I had also been inspired by a political science professor that I had who was a lawyer. So I did both. I taught junior high school during the day, and I went to St. John's Law School at night. The days were long, but very fulfilling. Upon graduation, I began working for the Legal Aid Society in a neighborhood law office in the South Bronx, and was able to apply my newly acquired lawyering skills to the problems that beset my most disadvantaged clients. At first, they were suspicious. They were not accustomed to women lawyers. Remember, this is the 60s, especially women lawyers who spoke Spanish, and I was often mistaken for a secretary or an interpreter. But the trust grew, and soon more women attorneys and more Spanish-speaking attorneys joined our small staff. And I recall my clients frightened by notices of evictions and family court warrants and other desperate familial and economic situations. And I recall the poverty of Hunts Point and the frustration that my clients encountered. I only hope that the years I spent at that office in some small way helped to alleviate the anguish of some of those poor families. Several years passed, and I had the unique opportunity of coming to work for the court system at what was then known the New York State Judicial Conference. Our offices were located at 270 Broadway, and I worked in counsel's office. I was the only woman in counsel's office, and certainly the only Hispanic. We worked hard, laying the foundation for what is now a most professional and efficient Office of Court Administration. I left the Judicial Conference in 1972 to become Chief Law Assistant in the Criminal Court at 100 Center Street, the first woman Chief Law Assistant in the city of New York, and of course, the first Hispanic. I was working for Judge David Ross, and when he became citywide administrative judge, he took me with him, where I assumed the duties of counsel to the New York City administrative judge, while maintaining my Chief Law Assistant functions in criminal court and the criminal division of Supreme Court. So I worked in the courts for close to 10 years and often wondered, while I was rendering bench assistance to our judges, could I become a judge? Was a career in judiciary within my realm of experience? Well, why not? I pursued the process, and 42 years ago, in 1978, probably before many of you who are watching this program this evening were born, I was appointed by Mayor Ed Koch to the Criminal Court of the City of New York, the first Hispanic woman on a court of record in the state of New York. I was making history, paving the road for others to come behind me. And in 1982, another historic event occurred. I was elected with the assistance of Al Placeres, as you heard earlier, and other friends, to our state Supreme Court for Manhattan. Again, the first Hispanic woman elected to that court. And then, of course, the ultimate dream came true on December 1st, 1993, that's 27 years ago. Then Governor Mario Cuomo announced his selection for the Court of Appeals, its first Hispanic and only its second woman. It's a 150-year history, and I enjoyed this crowning prize of the legal profession for 19 years. Unfortunately, it came to an end 8 years ago, when upon reaching 70, I became constitutionally required to step down. But I was very fortunate along the way. I met some wonderful people. I made wonderful friends, and I had mentors in the court system and in the various bar associations I had joined, including the Puerto Rican Bar Association, which at the time, and still is, was committed to working for the equality of opportunity and the advancement of Puerto Ricans and other Latinos in the legal profession and in the judiciary. And I also joined the Women's Bar Association, which was committed to promoting women in the profession. So by banding and networking and working together, women lawyers and minority lawyers generally have become a powerful force capable of affecting social and political change. We now cover the spectrum of our profession, and our numbers are ever growing. And as you know, I also became involved in Manhattan politics. Joining a political club certainly can provide minority lawyers with a forum, a starting place, an opportunity to serve one's community, and the opportunity of meeting people who, recognizing talent, can be very helpful in the process, and oftentimes very difficult process filled with uncertainty, complexity, screening panels, and unwanted criticism and scrutiny. But we made it through the process, and we're here to stay. I feel encouraged and emboldened just knowing that there are many who have followed after me, and our numbers are ever growing, and we continue making history. Now, I'd like to mention some of the friends I made along the way. I mentioned the fact that I was working in a legal aid office in the Bronx. My supervisor was Bob Sackett, Judge Sackett, who became a judge. There was another Puerto Rican judge as well. There were three of us, Bob Sackett, myself, and Joe Torres. He became a judge as well in family court. There were other people in that office who became judges, Peggy Bernheim, Howard Trussell. The office is filled with judges in the making. Along the way, I met folks at the Puerto Rican Bar Association. I met Cesar Perales, who was president of the Puerto Rican Bar Association. At the time I joined in the late 60s, early 70s. I don't remember, Cesar, whether you were president before or after Austin Torres, but it was during that period of time. We had our wonderful meetings at El Quijote restaurant and at the offices of the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. And they were great meetings, and you led them so well, and that's where I first met you, Cesar. Also met Joe Arazo, who is an inspiration to many of us, who probably without Joe, many of us would not have been on the bar, on the bench. I mean, he is somebody who has helped so many of us achieve our positions. There are just too many names to mention. I met Betty Lugo through the Puerto Rican Bar, met many, many friends, and I can't mention them all. But I am very happy to be here. I feel very close to the Puerto Rican Bar Association, having been a member since the late 60s or early 70s. I'm not quite sure when I joined, but I graduated from law school in 67, so obviously it was after that. And the Historical Society, which I've been a member of from its very inception, from first Judge K created the Historical Society, and I was lucky enough to be its chair for about 6 years, and now Steve Younger has succeeded me and is so ably leading the Historical Society. So I thank both the Puerto Rican Bar Association and you, Betty, in particular, and Steve from the Historical Society for inviting me to participate this evening. Thank you so much.
Judge Ciparick, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And you had a very unique relationship with our beautiful, wonderful, beloved Judge Judith K.
I miss her
just
so
give
much.
Could you just tell us a little, because she was always at every Puerto Rican Bar Association gala. She always said presente. She was always involved. Could you just say a few
Well, she
words?
loved music and she loved to dance. She was a wonderful leader, a wonderful friend. When I went up to the Court of Appeals, I didn't know her that well. I had met her several times, but she greeted me so warmly. It was a snowy day in January. She greeted me with a bottle of champagne and a warm hug, and basically took me under her wing, and we became friends, and we were friends for the entire time while she was there, and even after she had retired, and after I retired as well. And I mean, up until a few days before her death, I visited her house, and it was my birthday, and she had a birthday cake for me. She insisted that I come there, and I miss her terribly. She was a good friend, a good mentor, and a beautiful person, like you said, Betty. Thank you.
Thank you.
But let me just say also, if I may, she has been followed by some wonderful leaders. Judge Lippman and Judge Janet DiFiore are also great leaders of the court system, and have followed in her footsteps, and have done wonderful things for the court system and continue to do so.
Yes, and just for the record, the Puerto Rican Bar Association has honored Judge Judith K, has honored Judge Lippman, and has honored Judge DiFiore.
Yes.
Because they always say presente. They understand our struggle. They respect our story, and they're always very supportive. And that's what I love about the court system. It's about outreach and letting people know, hey, we're here to help and work together. Thank you so much, Judge. And now we go to the Honorable Cesar Perales. And Cesar Perales is a good friend. And I still remember when I graduated law school in 1984, Albany Law School, I remember when Governor Mario Cuomo appoints Cesar Perales as the first Puerto Rican, but he's actually Puerto Rican and Dominican, for those of you who don't know, he's the first Latino state commissioner to head Department of Social Services. And I write him a letter because I'm all excited. I'm like, I'm in Albany Law School. And I'm like, wow, we got a Latino state commissioner. And unbeknownst to me, Cesar is the founder of the Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund, which is the organization that helped me get into law school. So Cesar has done wonderful things and continues to do wonderful things. And he's the former Secretary of State. He's currently vice chair of the SUNY board. And he's done so many things, but the one thing I believe that he's most proud of is founder and CEO, first CEO of the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund. And Cesar, welcome and thank you so much for joining us tonight and sharing your story with us.
Thank you, Betty, for those kind words, and actually for putting this program together. I think it's very, very important, and I hope you continue to do some of these things. That our legacy is very, very important. I know that we're pressed for time, so I will move as quickly as I can to talk a little bit about myself and about the Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund. First of all, as Betty indicated, I was born here of a Puerto Rican father and a Dominican mother, grew up in Manhattan on the west side, 143rd Street to be exact. And it's relevant because my inspiration to become a lawyer really came from my father, who had gone bankrupt, lost his business, and felt that he had been treated very badly by the courts during the bankruptcy proceedings. And he told me that I should consider becoming a lawyer because Latinos and other people who were poor did not have an opportunity to use the law to protect themselves. And later, because I'm a little older, a couple of years older than Carmen Ciparick, but I grew up during the Civil Rights Movement. And that too imbued me with a sense of justice. And so that may explain part of my career. I won't go into that too much, but that inspired me when I heard about a place called Mobilization for Youth Legal Services to try to get a job there. It was the first program of its kind in the Lower East Side. Actually, it's first of its kind anywhere in the country, probably. Became the model for something known as neighborhood legal services. And I frankly badgered them a number of times in order to get a job soon after I graduated from law school. I got a job there, became a very aggressive young lawyer. At the age of 27, when other legal services programs were being created as a result of the war on poverty, a local board in Williamsburg selected me to actually start such an office. And I spent a number of years at legal services. On the side, I also had time to represent activist college students who would take over their campuses. I represented the Young Lords when they took over a church in Harlem. And at the same time, got involved with Model Cities, got to meet two other young lawyers, Victor Marrero and Jorge Batista. They shared my vision of creating a legal organization, something along the lines of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund that was doing so much good in this country. And Jacob Javits, who was a supporter of Model Cities, knew Victor very well because Victor ran the South Bronx office. He managed to get us an invitation to go visit Ted Kennedy, the senator from Massachusetts, who kept the place in Manhattan. And the three of us went to visit him. And after a good visit, he decided that he would help us raise money. Now, if the Kennedys tell you they're going to help you raise money, they raise money. We also, because we were getting so much support from the foundations, were able to get people like Robert Morgenthau, Nicholas Katzenbach, Jacob Javits, among many others, to join our board. We had a large board. We had as many non-Latinos as we had Latinos. I mean, Herman Bedillo was on our board, Jose Cabranes. There was a young lawyer by the name of Geraldo Rivera that some of you may have heard of. All of these people came together imbued with the idea that the Latino community, the Puerto Rican community, could use the law to make social change, to advance the interests of the community. Our first lawsuit was on behalf of an organization called Aspira, because I had become very friendly with the founder of Aspira, Antonia Pantoja, who felt that we could use the law to help Puerto Rican students in the New York City school system, because they sat there not understanding a word of what was going on in the classroom. This was, of course, during the time of the great Puerto Rican migration. And we brought a lawsuit saying that they were being denied equal protection, that their failure to get an education like everybody else was clear. Something had to be done to assist them to understand what was going on in the classroom. That lawsuit was successful. We ultimately got a consent decree in our favor, and it made a tremendous difference to these kids. And at the same time, I've learned over the years, it also opened the doors to the Board of Education for teachers. And today, a very vital part of the Latino middle class are teachers in the New York City Board of Education and elsewhere, where we continue to bring lawsuits of this nature. Some of you may not know that Puerto Rican lawyers, even well before the Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund, were very important in advancing the Puerto Rican community, which was a dominant community, as Alfredo Placeres has indicated. Everybody was Puerto Rican. I was half Dominican, half Puerto Rican, but I was Puerto Rican. We made some of the others, Herman Badillo, Irma Santaella, were people who had testified before the Congress to include in the 1965 Voting Rights Act a portion that related to people born under the American flag in a place called Puerto Rico. I didn't mention Puerto Rico, I mentioned about people going to school under the American flag. That was important because we wanted to do away with the literacy test that had stopped Puerto Ricans from voting. And it worked, it passed. Puerto Ricans began to participate. We subsequently used it to ensure that Puerto Ricans not only could vote, but they could understand what they were voting about. We sued, one of the people I sued is that there was a guy by the name of David Dinkins, who was then the chair of the Board of Elections, demanding that the election system in New York provide assistance to non-English speaking Puerto Ricans, based on the fact that they had been given the right under the Voting Rights Act to vote, and that they could not have an informed vote without some assistance. The ballots in those days were only in English, and there was no speaking of Spanish anywhere in the polling place. At any rate, that was a lawsuit. We won 2 actual lawsuits regarding bilingual ballots, and I think they made a tremendous difference. Another lawsuit that the Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund brought that I think is very, very relevant had to do with the Hispanic Society of Police. We challenged the exam. We were successful. The exam was not job related. It was what I would call an IQ exam, or an exam about where you actually showed your proficiency in English and in reading and writing, which was not related, frankly, to being a police officer. And at the same time, incidentally, they had a height requirement that also had a disparate impact on Puerto Ricans. So all of these lawsuits, frankly, were successful and made a tremendous difference. Today, there are probably more Puerto Rican and Latino cops than there are Irish cops, believe it or not. So next time you see a cop and they've got the little tag that says Rodriguez or Gomez, you'll know that that was not the fact until lawyers working on behalf of the community brought this lawsuit. I can go on and on about the differences that we made, but I know that the hour draws late. But it is important for you to understand that the Legal Defense Fund, started by these young Puerto Ricans, has continued through its board to bring on many people. Today, many of the board members actually are partners in the major law firms in New York. But I want to talk about one member of our board for a moment, Jose Cabranes, who was then serving as chair. He followed Victor Moreno, who was the original chair. I was the chief executive. And Jose Cabranes, who had been associated with Yale, knew a young woman from Yale who was in the city. She had just graduated, was working for Robert Morgenthau in the district attorney's office. And she wanted to join the board, and he proposed her, and she was the youngest member of the board. Her name was Sonia Sotomayor. And Sonia spent, I think, the next maybe 12, 13 years, I don't know how long, on our board. She left the board to go on the bench, and she was very engaged in something else that the Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund was very engaged in, which others, including Betty, have alluded to, which was getting Puerto Rican students into law school. And Sonia, believe it or not, chaired the board committee on that effort, which was our education effort, which is why we're called Legal Defense and Education Fund. And but she was also involved in supporting our litigation. It's relevant only because when she was nominated by Barack Obama to serve on the Supreme Court, the people who opposed her were very vociferous and argued that she had been on the board of a radical group. Now, I never thought of myself as radical, and I don't think Sonia thought of herself as radical. We were committed to making sure that Latinos received equal protection under the law, but we didn't think that that was particularly radical. And she, regardless of the attacks, was ultimately approved to serve on the Supreme Court, where she is today. And it's something that, while not directly done by the Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund, very much relates, and I'd like to think, gives her a particular vantage point, a particular experience that she uses in her decisions. I suspect that she will now be the most progressive voice on the most important court in the land. I don't know, is there anything else that you wanted me to say, Betty?
Yeah, we're gonna have a program just on you one day because you have so much information. I just want to thank you for the courage and all the founders of the Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund who started the fund, and it's still going strong, being led now by Juan Cartagena, who's doing a wonderful job. And I was part of the Latino Law Student Network, and Carmen Pacheco and myself were part of that group. And Louis DeGraff, former Young Lords, who was the chief of the education division, was one of my mentors. That's why it's so appropriate for me to tell the story, because it's like everybody had an impact in my life. And it says that you are truly wonderful. You're still, supporting and doing the good work. And now, as vice chair of the SUNY board, I know that you're helping to educate others and outreach and to bring more people into the profession, especially the younger generation. So thank you so much. And thank you for continuing your great work in that legislation. I just want to say, I know we may be going 2 minutes over, but we're going to speak to Judge Alalisa Torres next. But crucial to that movement, when the Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund was founded, was the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. And it was the Puerto Ricans from New York who eliminated the English literacy requirement. And the reason why we vote in different languages in this country is because of the Puerto Ricans in New York and because of your courage, Cesar, and the courage of the founders of the Puerto Rican Legal Defense on that legislation. So thank you. The Aspira Aman Aspirante, opening that door, giving us respect. Again, you took on crucial challenges that molded our country, and Puerto Ricans. Judge Cabranes writes that in 1958, the first great migration of Puerto Ricans from Puerto Rico here to the mainland, that's when there was a need for organizations like the Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund to help us and you rose to the occasion. Thank you so much, Cesar. Thank you. And now,
Thank you, Betty.
yes, let me introduce to you the next segment. The Latino lawyers discussed their experiences, moderated by Carmen A. Pacheco. And Carmen A. Pacheco is a founder and partner of Pacheco and Lugo, the first Hispanic woman-owned law firm in New York. She is my business partner. We founded this law firm about 30 years ago. Former president of the Puerto Rican Bar Association, chair of the Women's Committee, and co-chair of the Historic Preservation Committee. Carmen Pacheco, welcome.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for attending this historic moment of preserving our legacy and our history. In 2017, I was the president of the Puerto Rican Bar Association when the Puerto Rican Bar Association Scholarship Fund awarded scholarships in excess of $171,000 to Puerto Rican and Latino law students to ensure diversity remains steadfast in the legal profession. That is our mission, and that is our goal, making sure that there is diversity in the legal profession. As you heard, Puerto Ricans and Latinos have made many impacts and contributed to our judicial system despite the challenges they face. Individuals may have the intention to undertake good actions, but nevertheless fail to do so. Sometimes people may judge or be judged unfairly. Implicit bias, also called unconscious bias, plays an immeasurable role when viewing people in line with their race and ethnicity, accent, language, socioeconomic status, gender, and sexual orientation. Often individuals stand silent when stereotypes are flaunted about specific groups like Latinos. Sadly, in those instances, some individuals fail to confront the utterer about their unspoken assumptions and beliefs. Implicit bias describes a spontaneous connection concerning specific groups of people and stereotypes associated with them. Those stereotypic percepts may be activated by situational cues like an accent, skin color, and social economic position. Implicit bias can quickly and knowingly exert its influence on perception, memory, and behavior. This overgeneralization makes it more likely that we think about and treat all members of a group the same way, thus making people respond in biased ways even when they are not explicitly prejudiced. In Puerto Rican and Latino communities, we have three main teachings, which I say are our stereotypes. Family first, education a must, be true and proud of who you are and where you come from. However, that is not the way the media and others advance us. They have a separate stereotype for us. To provide us with a brief discussion on impact of implicit bias confronted by Latino lawyers, we welcome our distinguished panelists and friends. Attorneys Angélicque Moreno, Norma Ortiz, William Pagan, and Betty Lugo. Angélicque was the 2018-2019 president of the New York State Academy of Trial Lawyers. She comes from a family that believed and believes that education was the only way out of the housing projects located in the South Bronx. She is an advocate and an entrepreneur. She firmly believes that in opening doors for the next generation to walk through and lead strong, tirelessly, and boldly into the future. Norma is a second-generation Puerto Rican attorney whose father is Frank Ortiz, graduate of Harvard. She believes, like her father, that our Spanish-speaking community is seriously underrepresented. She dedicates her time to ensure that our community receives top-notch legal advice that is focused on protecting businesses, property owners, and working families, and debt and the loss of family members. William is a product of the NYCHA houses, single-family home. He has his story, but William didn't let that stop him. He, is a super lawyer, William Pagan. Betty Lugo was the founding partner of Pacheco and Lugo, the first Hispanic woman-owned law firm in New York, was my business partner. Betty Lugo is the first Puerto Rican Latina to chair the New York State Trial Lawyers Section. She is one of 6 children who grew up in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and she has dedicated her life to securing the interest and lifting the community of Latinos up. So now we can start our program. As Latinos, we are taught to create our history and not permit someone to alter our path. And we are in control of our destiny. Angélicque, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, Carmen, I agree with the sentiment that we should not be discouraged or deterred from following our path and creating our own destiny. Growing up poor, Puerto Rican, and a female in the housing projects of the South Bronx presented challenges. However, my family believed that those challenges were best to be viewed as inconveniences. My mother, who was left a widow at the age of 28 while pregnant with my sister, once said, "We all have a sad story to tell, but that sad story should not define us or prevent us from striving for greatness in all that we do." I've always tried to keep those words top of mind. Once I left my home and started college and eventually law school, I questioned whether I belong. I asked myself, am I as smart as the other students that sat alongside me? This feeling of being inadequate was amplified when a fellow student came up to me the second week of law school and simply stated, "You did not earn your seat in class. You are a product of a diversity action plan." There was no doubt this law student actually believed that there were more qualified individuals that should be at the law school instead of me. It was at this time that the words that my grandfather said when I got into law school hit home. He said, "It's not you, Angélicque, who is the lucky one to have gone into law school. The world needs the perspective of a Boricua. It is the law school that's lucky to have you." In creating my own path after I graduated law school, I chose to become a trial attorney and an advocate for those who suffer injuries that changed their lives. You see, my cousin was injured due to medical malpractice. He suffered debilitating injuries, including cerebral palsy and quadriplegia. Like in many Latino households, we lived with my cousin and his parents, my grandparents, and my family in a 3-bedroom apartment. I had a firsthand view of how his injuries affected everyone around him. I was determined to be an advocate as a trial attorney for victims just like my cousin. Early in my career, an employer told me that being a trial attorney was a bad idea. In fact, I would be better behind the scenes in assisting the efforts of the trial attorney than being one. That just didn't sit well with me. I decided I would prove her wrong, and I did. I never again lost sight of the fact that I control my destiny. This summer, July 2020, I just ended my tenure as the first Latino president of the New York State Academy of Trial Lawyers, an achievement that I am most proud of. This is a bar association that consists of trial lawyers from all parts of New York State, including New York City, where I practice. Before my tenure as president, this had been an organization exclusively headed by men and only had one other woman president. Notably, there was no one of color. Under my presidency, diversity and inclusion was a central theme. I can only hope that I led the New York State Academy of Trial Lawyers with dignity and respect, and that I made my Latino brothers and sisters proud. In staying true to our path while creating our own destiny, to borrow a phrase from our fellow Latino, Lin-Manuel Miranda, we can show how Latinos deserve to be in the room where it happens.
So the experiences of the different panelists is extremely unique. Norma, you had a father who in the 50s went to Harvard Law School and graduated, and then couldn't get a job. Is it that it was someone like him and even your mother who was a principal of an elementary school? Are those the people you can say that inspired your strength and gave you the courage even when you were confronted with adversity?
I can absolutely say that. And I actually wrote my response to your question. So I'm going to read it so I don't go over. Because my parents and my family really were my inspiration, and watching them suffer and work really hard has always been a really important part of my life and who I am as a lawyer. So I'd say that both of my parents overcame adversity and bias because of their Puerto Rican background. My mother, Blanca, became one of the first Hispanic public school principals in Brooklyn, where she became the principal of the elementary school that she attended. She was a leader in bilingual education, and she fought for everything that she attained. She didn't have mentors and didn't have a lot of help. And she often spoke to me about how hard it was for her, but that it was really important that we make a difference for our community. My dad graduated from Harvard in the late 50s, but as you said, couldn't get a corporate job because he was poor and he was Puerto Rican, and he couldn't get a letter of recommendation from the board of directors of the place he wanted to work in. I recently found a rejection letter from law school that he kept all of his life. In my mind, my father was a brilliant lawyer's lawyer, and he did achieve professional success, but he did it at a price. He worked all the time, very often through the night, and he dedicated countless hours to Hispanic causes, political campaigns, judicial campaigns. He formed civic associations. He was one of the first members of the PRBA. He told me that he raised the first Puerto Rican flag in City College. And he was very, very proud of his achievements and always encouraged me, but I know that it was not very easy for him. He always felt that he was viewed as a really good Puerto Rican lawyer and not just as a really good lawyer. And he was always really supportive of me in ensuring that I had confidence in myself and in my abilities as a lawyer. So when I graduated from law school, my first job was working on bankruptcy cases for the Department of Justice. And I knew absolutely nothing about bankruptcy. And when I got that job offer, my father said, there's no Puerto Ricans and there's nobody that speaks Spanish in New York City that knows business bankruptcy, because we would only work on business bankruptcy cases in those years, Chapter 11 cases. He said, you could learn that skill and you'll learn how to practice in federal court, and you can bring it back and help our community with a skill that a lot of people don't have. And during those years, I relied on my inner courage and my confidence very often. I was always the only Latina in the courtroom. There were very few women. I was often the only lawyer on the side of the government against big firms and 6 lawyers, 7 lawyers, 8 lawyers. And it wasn't easy. But I would, go back to the encouragement and the strength that he had inspired in me. And when I would get, nervous or feel like maybe I can't do this, I think about how hard it was for him and my mother and what they had to overcome. And then I felt that my problem really wasn't as big as I thought it was, and that would help ground me. He also encouraged me to do the best and be the best, because he said that my successes were successes for our community as well. He always told me, no one is better than you. He said that some people may be better writers or better speakers than others, or have more money or less money or a fancy house, but no one has more worth than you do. And that simple principle was a source of strength for me many, many times whenever I was in a situation where I was the only Latina in a hearing, in a meeting, giving a presentation. I would think about that, and that gave me a source of strength. So I would say that I practice law under these guiding principles. I work hard for my clients, and I'm honest and fair with my adversaries. And in some ways, fighting bias may have made me a better lawyer. I learned to enjoy the surprised response I would receive when my adversary would compliment me on the quality of my papers instead of taking offense. I learned to appreciate being underestimated by other lawyers. I began to laugh when I was called Carmen or Maria or any other name associated with being a Spanish speaker, anything but Norma, right? And when I left the public sector and I finally joined my father's practice, I started to receive referrals from cases from my former adversaries. It turned out that I had developed a reputation for hard work, skill, and trustworthiness. And I attribute these traits to my Latin culture and my family. And after practicing law for 33 years, I still believe that I represent our Spanish-speaking community every single time I'm in a courtroom. I guess I will never shake that sense of duty, and I'm very proud of it.
It's amazing that all of us feel the same, Norma. Having come from a father who was from Peru, studied at Columbia, had a very heavy accent, and no one gave him a break.
Right.
It was hard times. And I think that still the hard times come here today. I mean, that is what implicit bias is all about.
Right.
Having all of these challenges and having confronted many of the prejudices and the biases that we see on a daily basis as lawyers, and also have when we're listening to people talk about Latinos, or they say you don't look like a Latina, or whatever it is. I mean, Bill, what have been your experiences during these times?
Thank you. My experiences have been wide and varied, sadly. I think I'll begin from the latest experience I've had with this type of implicit bias to when I was a child. As early as last year in Brooklyn Supreme Court, I was a victim of that bias by a judge who unknowingly did it, and I wouldn't put it, I wouldn't cast any aspersions on her. I think that because, and I think what you said before, Carmen, was that this is something that one does without knowing, and without knowing, this judge made me feel unwelcome and made me feel not like an attorney. And I remember looking at her, and she realized what she had done, and she was mortified. And you wonder, and I think the question is, what do you do as a victim of this? Do you react to it? Do you accept it? Do you learn from it? Do you better yourself? And I think under those circumstances, you have to choose to make yourself better, to learn from it, and to be stronger. I think most of the time you can put your chin down and resent the fact that this has happened to you and you've been a victim of that. Or you can stand up and say, that's not the role I'm accepting for myself. When I was a boy, you said I was from the projects. I was the product of a mom and 8 siblings, no dad. In going to school, there were a number of times I thought I was going to be a lawyer from the moment that I could speak, from the moment that I could think. For some reason, I believed that I would be a lawyer. And when I would raise that to my teachers, I was summarily dismissed over and over again. That's not what you should be thinking of. That's not the kind of job that you should go after. You should consider a trade school. In those days, they had trade schools. Those are the kind of biases. And again, I wouldn't cast aspersions on any of them, but they thought it better, seeing what they had seen before, to try to direct me to a place where I can earn a living, keep my mouth shut, not learn much, and survive. And I chose not to. That was the path that I chose. I think you said that we choose, when you began, you said that we choose our path. And the path I chose was to become a lawyer, regardless of what I was told and regardless of the warnings that I received. And it happens often. I was at a medium-sized bankruptcy firm called Oliver Steinler. They were incredibly hard on me. I don't know if that was implicit bias or the fact that they wanted to be the best. And sometimes you look at both of them and you wonder which one is which. Do they expect more from you because you're a minority, or do you expect more from you because maybe they believe in you? And so I tend to think, like Norma said, that sometimes you think you accept what's being said, you accept being called another name, for example, and you laugh at it, and you overcome it, and you become stronger by it, and you move on from it. And that's what I learned in my career. I've represented people for 30 years, and I make sure that the clients that I represent are treated with respect. 90% of them are Latinos. I give them respect. I give them courtesy. I show them what they generally don't get outside. And I'm very proud of that. And I'm very proud to show them that a Latino can do whatever a Latino or Latina wants.
You know, sometimes when we're confronted with many of these issues, sometimes you're standing and you're listening to people saying things and you don't understand why they're directing those comments either to someone else that you know is Latino, and sometimes it's to you. And these are very disheartening moments because you feel that maybe, you know, what am I doing here? Do I really belong? But it's all about perseverance and wanting to do the right thing and having a strong foundation and knowing that you have a team of people behind you. Everyone that I've spoken thus far is talking about, like we said, family first, education a must, and don't let anyone change your direction. And that is truly what's in the household of a Puerto Rican and Latino family. That is the most important. No matter what happens, you have to get educated. Querer es poder, education is power. So, or where there's a will, there's a way. And a lot of times at the door, Latinos are not permitted to enter the door because of their last names. If there are people looking for a Latino, you're in, or a minority, you're in. But at the gate, Sanchez, Pacheco, Rivera, Ortiz, Torres, Pagan, Lugo, lo que sea. What else? At times, if they don't want to hire a Latino, you don't get to come through the front door. You don't get that opportunity. It's based on a surname. And do you believe, even having this surname, that the fact that you're say presente, that I am present in the legal profession, this proves the stereotypes that others may have about Latino attorneys? Betty?
So the Spanish surname is an interesting issue because you heard Cesar Perales speak about the Aspira consent decree. Again, the uniqueness of being Puerto Rican. I have to emphasize that. Puerto Ricans are US citizens, United States citizens, by virtue of the Jones Act, 1917. We had a 100-year anniversary celebration with Judge Jose Cabranes 2 years ago. And because of that uniqueness of Puerto Ricans being the only Spanish-speaking US citizens in this country, there are laws, the 14th Amendment, that apply to us. So the Aspira consent decree, Spanish surname, Lugo, my first name is Betty. Lugo, many times people would say, oh, are you Italian? And I'm like, but it didn't matter if Italian, because Italians were also discriminated against because their name ends in a vowel. So the Spanish surname, I remember in high school, they segregated me and they said, anybody with a Spanish surname is getting this special test. That was the Aspira consent decree, the bilingual education, that push, that was important. So, and I started as the first Latina in the Nassau County DA's office. Again, people say, well, you know, people really won't know what you are, but I identify as Puerto Rican whenever anybody asks me, are you Hispanic? I said, no, I'm Puerto Rican. I was born in New York, but I'm Puerto Rican. And I was made in New York, no different than Governor Cuomo when he says that he was made in Puerto Rico. So that's the important. The Spanish surname does connote immediate discrimination. They immediately say, they already have us branded. When I worked at a private law firm in Nassau County, again, we had a defendant to defend Goya. And the partner says, well, I'm gonna go defend Goya, but you're gonna go represent the yeshiva. And I'm like saying, how interesting this is. It's like, you know, so there is not only the Spanish surname, but the cultural discrimination that we feel and that we encounter. We're treated differently. Trying a case recently in Supreme Kings, a big case where I represented an undocumented immigrant, and I got one of the largest verdicts. Pacheco and Lugo got one of the largest verdicts in a labor law case in 2014. Everybody in the courthouse, all the top trial attorneys says, Betty, settle for this, you gotta settle. And something said, no, don't settle, including my business partner, Carmen Pacheco, who we met Brooklyn College. We became friends. We're 3 days apart by birth. We started Pacheco and Lugo 30 years ago. We've been fighting strong, but I remember that case. And I remember the judge taking me to the side and telling me, you better take this money because your client is going to be deported and he will never see a dollar. And I found myself at a loss. I said, would she tell this? Would she say this to anybody else? Would she say this to a white male attorney? I mean, give me a break. To put intimidation and fear into me so I can accept this money. So what did I do? What does Betty Lugo do in this situation? I call my military and I said, this happened to me. What do I do? And so it was in chambers. So as soon as I had the opportunity to come back to court, I said, Your Honor, I would like to make a statement on the record. And I put it on the record. And I said, this is what happened in chambers. This is what you said. And this is what happened. And we are not accepting this offer. We are not accepting it. And she even questioned whether I had told my client that the offer was made. I mean, would this ever happen to a white male attorney? I don't think so. And that's something that this program is important because we're educating everyone about how we're treated. And I've been a lawyer for 35 years, and this is still going on. So yes, the Spanish surname is an issue. There are stereotypes, but because Pacheco and Lugo, we broke that stereotype when we started our law firm at One World Trade Center. Carmen Pacheco worked on Wall Street, St. John's Law Review. I was at the Nassau DA's office, and we said, we are going to make a difference. We are going to open a law firm at the World Trade Center. And we got respected for it. And we made new law in 1997 in the Southern District of New York. And we are proud of that as two young Latino attorneys. So yes, we always turn it around. It's always about educating others. Thank you.
Very good. And the fact that we are present, all of us, the attorneys, the judges, the panelists, it's proof positive that we are truly the stereotype. And that is what is being portrayed in the media. Now that we've heard from all of you, is there a message you wish to impart to the audience? For example, my message is genius has no ethnicity. Strength has no gender. Courage has no limit. William?
I think you used the word perfectly, perseverance. I think if you dedicate yourself and if you decide within yourself never to give up, no matter what, I think you will get anywhere you want. And it sounds almost like a dream. But I think in all of our cases, those dreams came true, despite the fact that others may not have wanted it.
I have one. Just because you haven't seen it done before doesn't mean you can't do it. And I hope that, especially the young lawyers listening, take that to heart, because you're hearing and you've heard and you will continue to hear first over and over again. And a lot of people made a difference and no one had done it before.
My message is simple. Sí se puede, yes you can, and God bless.
My message is don't be afraid to fail. You must try because together we rise and because we are here to help you. So please join the profession, get involved, get motivated, stand up, and we are here waiting for you to embrace you. Judge Alalisa Torres, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So back in 2019, in the fall, I was contacted by Fordham Law School. They said that they were going to put my grandfather into a permanent exhibit called Alumni of Distinction. He had graduated in 1926. There was going to be a ceremony last April, and they asked me to give the keynote address. Of course, that event was canceled. But before it was canceled, I decided that I wanted to do some research about my grandfather. And so I went to the Center for Puerto Rican Studies, which is at Hunter College. His papers are archived there. My aunt and uncle, after my grandfather died, organized his papers. They span over 100 years. They go back as far as the 1860s in Puerto Rico and go up to about 1994. He was born in 1897. He loved words and language and writing. So there are tons of letters and speeches, radio addresses, telegrams, which document his career, first as an attorney, then as a state legislator in the state assembly representing the South Bronx, and then as a family court judge. And it was such an eye-opener to go through these boxes of documents and to look at decades of fabulous photographs. I felt like I got a chance to know my grandfather as a 22-year-old in law school, and as an early practitioner during the Depression, during his involvement with the Harlem Lawyers Association, which had been started in 1927. That's now the Metropolitan Black Bar Association. This is 30 years before our association, the Puerto Rican Bar Association, was founded. And I found an article in the Amsterdam News that shows him attending an event at the Harlem Lawyers Association in 1928. I had hoped that I could bring to you a documentary that I have been working on about my grandfather. I was not able to finish it in time for tonight's event, but I do want to tell you about some of the highlights of his life. He was born in 1897, as I said, in Salinas, Puerto Rico, which is a tiny town on the southern coast. His father was a shoemaker, and the family moved between Salinas and Ponce. His father sometimes worked managing a shoe factory in Ponce, but they struggled financially. The year after my grandfather was born, in 1898, the Americans landed in Puerto Rico and forced out the Spaniards and completely transformed every aspect of government. So when he started school, he started with the Massachusetts curriculum. So he was studying the same thing that kids in Boston were studying. And the readers at that time had stories about children playing with snowmen and ice skating. So ultimately, he graduated from Ponce High School, which was a college preparatory school. Ponce High School in 1919, when he graduated, sent its students to University of Michigan, to MIT, to Harvard. And so he got a very solid education. It was 100% in English at that time, because that was the American determination that they were going to educate Puerto Ricans exclusively in English. And during high school, World War I was going on. He was drafted into the Army, and he was drafted into the segregated section. He was a brown-skinned man. And in Puerto Rico, there was an officer training camp, and it was divided. They divided the Puerto Ricans. And my grandfather, during that training, in his company, got to know Pedro Albizu Campos. And so Albizu Campos was older. He was the only member of the training camp to make first lieutenant. My grandfather was a second lieutenant. In any event, he wanted to go to law school, but in Puerto Rico, even though there was a law school, you could not work and study at the same time. And he understood that he could do that in New York. And so he came to New York in December.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Yes.
We're going to do a program just on your grandfather because we have Judge Jenny Rivera and Judge Michael Garcia that are next up. So I just want to give you 2 more minutes because your story, without your grandfather starting the Puerto Rican Bar Association, because he was the attorney for the Puerto Rican Bar Association, started. Yeah, he also incorporated, I believe, the Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund. I mean, his story deserves an entire day. And I am going to ask the Historical Society to let us do your grandfather's story. But we have like 2 minutes and then we have to go on to Judge Rivera and Judge Garcia. But tell us just in a few words about your grandfather and your father. I mean, I feel like I was part of their life when I saw the pictures on your wall and I saw your father with Bobby Kennedy and a picture of JFK back in 1957. So that had to be when Justice Irma Vidal Santaella, the first Puerto Rican female judge who's elected in New York, and she's running for Congress in the Bronx. So she knew your dad very well. She was around the same time, Herman Badillo, who all of us know. I mean, what a rich history. And there's so much there. And we do want to hear the story, but we have to now go on to Judge, so we're going to go on to Judge Jenny Rivera and Judge Michael Garcia. Judge Alalisa Torres, thank you so much for joining us. And we're going to continue the conversation. And I have the photographs of that beautiful wall of fame that means so much to all of us. In fact, the Puerto Rican Bar Association names an award after Felipe Torres, and I believe the Latino Judges Association, formerly the Association of Judges of Hispanic Heritage, founded in 1985, also names an award in honor of your grandfather and your father, who was one of Frank Torres, Supreme Court Bronx County, who was one of the founders as well of that organization. Thank you, thank you. So now we're going to go on to Judge Jenny Rivera and Judge Michael Garcia. Judge Jenny Rivera is Associate Judge on the New York State Court of Appeals. She is she has senior status, and Judge Michael Garcia is also an Associate Judge of the New York State Court of Appeals. So welcome to the program, Judge Jenny Rivera and Judge Michael Garcia. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Betty. It's great to be here, and it's such an honor to be sharing this virtual event with so many impressive speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. So I know that basically, just, we want to hear about your journey, Judge Rivera. So, and both of you, just tell us about your journey, about how you got to where you are today.
Jenny, I defer to your senior status here.
Yeah, the senior associate, let's not call it senior status, although I know that wasn't your turn to begin with, Mike. Good evening, everyone. Before I start my very brief comments, I want to thank very much the Puerto Rican Bar Association, the Historical Society for the program and for giving an opportunity for so many members of our community to speak about their experiences and the challenges that they and their parents, grandparents, and their families and communities have faced. So I thank you very much for that. And I want to thank also Marilyn Marcus for her assistance with this segment of the program, really helping us make it possible. Thank you, Marilyn, for the hard work you put into this. And I do want to thank all the past and current presidents, officers, and members of the board of directors of the Puerto Rican Bar for all the great work that you have done throughout the years. I know that the Puerto Rican Bar Association, along with Pearl Def, made it possible for me to go to law school. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity that I had to have the professional life that has been so wonderful as a result of the sacrifices that have been made and the pioneers that went before us. Some of them obviously have spoken this evening. So just very quickly, not the story, but just a little bit about my background. And I'm going to touch on some of the themes that I've already heard tonight as I speak. The first one being that I did hear at least one other person, Judge Ciparick, talk about attending parochial school, and that was my case. I attended parochial school from the 5th grade forward. I went to the public school before then. The parochial school I have always viewed as the private school for the Puerto Rican community and the other Latino communities in New York City. And so I am a product of those particular schools. I was raised on the Lower East Side. I'm born in New York City. I'm born into what is commonly called in the data a single family headed household. My mother came from Puerto Rico in the 1940s and made her life here. She, like so many women of her period, helped build the garment industry. People will remember that New York City was known for the rag trade, and my mother worked in several factories, glove factories, hat factories, and so forth. And she raised me and my brother and my sister by herself in tenements, in projects, in not such a wonderful environment. We grew up poor. There's no other way to color that. But I always felt a great deal of love and support in the family that I was raised, and I very much enjoyed school, and that was my escape. I loved reading, I loved going to school, I loved learning, I loved puzzles, and that was sort of my escape from everything that was around me at the time. I went to Princeton University, which was my first time living outside of my home, and it was a very difficult and challenging experience for me, being away from home, being away from my mother, who I was very close to, and being away from the community that was so familiar to me. But I found, as was the case in all of the institutions I've ever gone to school in or worked in, I found a support network. I found my affinity groups. Those were other Latinos, those were students of color, people of color in all of those environments. And they really were my support network, people I became fast friends with and have remained friends with, and people who shared my view and my experiences of those particular institutions. So I went to Princeton, I then went to NYU Law School, and then later on, after working some years, I went back to law school to get a master's from Columbia, because although I was deeply committed to a public interest background, which is another theme that I heard from the various speakers before, that interest in public service, public interest work, and I know that my colleague, Judge Garcia, spent much of his life in government, that same sense of public service and how important it is to our development. I've heard that from the other speakers. For myself, and I think that's true for so many others, that was just an interest in trying to make the world better than the one that I inherited, trying to be part of a solution, trying to find our way through the challenges that we faced. And for myself, I was very interested in civil rights and poverty law, because of course that was the experience that I knew, and I wanted to be part of anything that helped people like my own family, like myself, find their way and address difficult legal challenges. Along the way in law school, I got a real interest in teaching. And so after being in public interest being a public interest lawyer for some time, I then started what was almost a 20-year career in legal academia, teaching most of that time at CUNY Law School, again, teaching the next generation of public interest lawyers, but also having taught at Suffolk Law School in Boston. So I left New York to go and start my teaching career. I also taught for a brief period of time at American University in DC at the law school. So it's really been a wonderful experience teaching in all those environments and teaching all different kinds of students from all different kinds of backgrounds. Once the vacancy that was made available as a result of Judge Ciparick having to retire from the court, I applied to the Court of Appeals. And of course, that has been the latest part of my legal career, having spent just over 7 years now on the court. And all of those experiences, I have tried very hard to come to them with commitment to doing the best work that I can, to a real intellectual curiosity for the work. And those things I learned from my mentors, my family, and just what is innate to myself. And of course, before and at different points in my career, I have done clerkships, which I have really treasured because they have really exposed me to this judicial decision-making that I am now responsible for and the way the court system works. And I clerked both in the Second Circuit Pro Se Law Clerk's office, which was a fabulous experience when I first graduated law school. And I also clerked after a few years of practice for then Judge Sonia Sotomayor, who was sitting on the Southern District at that time. And she has been very much my role model for the way I've tried to approach my work on the bench and why I have found really her trajectory in the judiciary such an inspiration, as well as the inspiration of so many other people who have spoken today and who I know are in the participants. I was looking at the list who are observing the program today, other judges who have gone before or who are my contemporaries. I have learned so much from them, and I continue to learn from them, which I think is one of the other themes, the way so many of us have learned from others as we've moved our way through our particular careers. The one other thing that I did do for a brief period of time, and then I'll stop, because this—
You're a little bit over time.
I'm sorry.
You're a little bit over time, Judge Rivera. You're cutting into Judge Garcia's time.
I know. I'm going to segue right into Judge Garcia's time.
Thank you.
You've already been cut short, previously. I did work for the Attorney General's office for a brief period of time, which I did find very satisfying and gave me a real insight into the deep commitment of government lawyers like Judge Garcia.
There you go.
Thank you, Judge Rivera. We are so proud of you. And thank you always for saying presente to every Puerto Rican Bar Association event that we have, for encouraging diversity in the profession and for everything you do. We're so proud of you. Thank you so much. Judge Garcia, please tell us a little bit about your personal journey. You have
Thank
5
you.
minutes.
Thank you, Betty, and thank you, Judge Rivera. You know, I won't repeat, obviously, given my 5 minutes, the thanks and the gratitude expressed by Judge Rivera. I want to echo it, and especially the Puerto Rican Bar Association, which has always welcomed me and been so supportive. Thank you, Betty. I grew up on Long Island. My parents were high school graduates, no college. I went to school in a public school system out on the island. There were, I think, 2 Hispanics in my entire high school, not counting maybe our siblings. And I went from there to Binghamton University, a state school. My dad, he started working in the mailroom of Manuel Garcia in the 50s, started working in the mailroom in a shipping company, and actually worked his way up through, and we've heard so many stories like this tonight, impressive stories. I mean, really just working harder and with such dedication and will, worked his way up through that company to become the head of the company by the time he retired. And really always stressed, both my parents, such a cliche but true, education. And they were great lovers of books and reading, even though, as I said, they had no education beyond Brooklyn public schools, high school. So when it came time to go to college, I really, you know, now that I do this with my children, you know, they have so much in the way of sources and guidance, and I didn't know anything, and I knew, you know, I didn't want to spend all that much money, you know, I'd have it. So I went to Binghamton. I noticed some of the other folks who have spoken tonight went to the state schools as well, and I really loved it there. Met some terrific teachers, as I had in high school, you know, English teachers primarily. And that was really what I loved and what I majored in at the time. When I graduated from Binghamton, I went to William & Mary. I had a teaching assistant job there, and I got a master's degree. I really felt like I needed more than I had gotten as an undergraduate in that field. Worked a few years in like local newspaper, very local newspapers, and then I went to Albany Law School, where I know you and Betty, and they gave me a free ride. They gave me a full scholarship because, again, I was very concerned about finances and about, you know, how would I pay for law school, and, you know, I worked and they were really very, very generous, and I'll always be grateful to them for that. And there I met terrific teachers and mentors, including Professor Siegel, New York Practice Book, who made me his teaching assistant there, and really was an inspiration as well. When I came out of law school, again, I didn't know any lawyers before I went there, and I really had no idea what I wanted to do. I kind of found myself channeled into a big law firm in Wall Street, where I was a corporate lawyer for a year. And I enjoyed it, and it was very financially rewarding, but I felt like I really wanted to do something else. And I was very fortunate enough, as Judge Rivera said, with her clerkships, to get a clerkship with then Associate Judge Judith Kay, who we've heard about also tonight, and who has been an inspiration as well for so many folks. And she hired me for a 2-year clerkship, and it was really Hank Greenberg, who clerked there before me, says the hardest he ever worked in his life. I mean, we worked incredibly hard, and she was really such a fine jurist, but such an amazing person and force in the law. So I would consider her really one of the people who guided me the most in my career. And as I was leaving that clerkship, I realized that I didn't want to go back to a law firm at that point. I wanted to continue in public service in some way. So I went into a series, which I only have 5 minutes, I won't get into, but of various public service jobs in the federal government for the most part, in the U.S. Attorney's Office, down in Washington, Homeland Security. I came back as the United States Attorney in Manhattan for 05 to 08, and really got to see how the system worked on the executive branch side from the inside. And I loved that. And then in 08, I left. I became a partner at a law firm for 7 years, and that was long enough. Again, I enjoyed my clients. I enjoyed the work. I enjoyed the pro bono side of it. But I really wanted to take a job again where I felt that I could contribute in a service type way. And in 2016, was lucky enough to be selected for the Court of Appeals.
Thank you, Judge Garcia. Thank you so much. The one thing about both of you is that although you're on the top court of New York State, you're still very humble, and that is the takeaway that I get from both of you. Judge Jenny Rivera, I don't believe you mentioned that you started the Claro Project at CUNY Queens Law School, the Center for Latino Rights and Responsibilities, which is a program that is still going on today at CUNY Queens, and teaches everyone about the 14th Amendment and the rights and responsibilities of everyone. But then Professor Jenny Rivera started that program, and thank you so much for doing that. And Judge Michael Garcia also very involved with Albany Law School, involved with the students, and still gives back to Albany Law School and mentors young lawyers and future lawyers. So the next question, which is, so the evolution discuss your evaluation of the evolution of Latinos on the bench. Where are we today? The experiences, you heard the experiences of the Latino pioneer judges, the positives, the negatives, implicit bias. This year, we had the study from Jay Johnson. Where do you see judges today and the future of Latino judges in New York? Judge Jenny Rivera.
I'll let Judge Garcia start since I started the last one. We can play tag on
The
that.
one about my background. Thanks, Betty. Look, I would say what I've heard my friend, Presiding Justice Orlando Acosta, who we all know, say, there's been measurable progress and there's work to be done. I think that's the line that he uses, and he writes and speaks a great deal about this topic. And I think that's true. I mean, he tells a story that back, in the early days, he has a photo the Latino judges in New York, 1985, and there's 13 people in the picture. Forward to 2020, there's 90 Latino judges in New York, which is, and everyone would agree, incredible progress. But given the population in New York, obviously work to be done to get a representative sample. I mean, I think this segues too into what we're talking about generally on this topic, which is how important is that, and how, what's the value of it? And again, you go back to Judge K, who would say that a diverse bench gives the public this feeling of inclusion and confidence in the system. And by the same token, when you point out problems and institutional issues, the way Jay Johnson has, and I know Jay Johnson for a long time, and have great respect for him. And when you point out those types of issues, it likewise makes you realize, how much is left to be done and what we need to do to try to redouble efforts to get that feeling out there of confidence, which, quite frankly, has been shaken at times in the recent past. And I think, look, I'm not a pessimist. I'm an optimist. And I think the work that goes on is good work. And the voices that you hear are strong voices that we've heard tonight, and how important it is to hear them and to give them a platform. So, I applaud the work that people are doing now, and I recognize that we're not in a place that anyone feels like, great, we're done. And I really have so much admiration for the folks that continue in that field. So, bottom line, my experience on the bench has been a great one, and my experience going through the process, I felt no issues that way, but I have no doubt that I was able to have that experience because of what others have experienced in the past and fought for, and the work that they've done to get to us to the point we're at now. So I can't tell you here, and I came to the bench also very late in my career, unlike a lot of other people we've heard from, like Carmen Ciparick, who worked her way through various levels of the judiciary. I came onto the bench later. I came on at a time, I think, where the process was very different and the people involved in that process were very different. Judge K was chairing the commission when I went through. I'm very fortunate in that way, but again, I recognize that that's not luck. That's the work of many others that had to face much, much greater adversity.
Thank you, Judge Garcia. Judge Rivera.
Yeah, I echo very much what my colleague Judge Garcia has said. I mean, I think numerically, yes, when you go to from zero to some, that is progress. It's certainly not the kind of progress that we should be proud of, but the effort behind it, we should always be proud of. So I think in that way, yes, the numbers are certainly not where we want them to be, but we also have to recognize that if we are only focusing on the numbers of Latinos on the bench without thinking of the entire pipeline and where that pipeline is corroded along the way, that we are missing an opportunity for real change. So the numbers have to change, not only in the sense that there has to be an opening and an opportunity and an interest from those who affect those numbers. That is, from those who are the ones who are going to make recommendations, the ones who are going to give the reference letters, the ones who are going to be on the committees, the ones who are going to do the appointments, the ones who are going to help with the electoral process. But we also have to recognize that we need to be, in my opinion, looking at the third grade and moving forward. So we always have young people who are moving through, who can really see that a dream is obtainable, not merely a pipe dream in that pipeline. And so I think we have to think of it that way, but I agree that going from zero to some is positive. It has not exponentially changed. And that's the real problem at the end of the day. Although I am very proud of the work when it comes to our Court of Appeals, because our Court of Appeals is quite diverse, right? The second female chief judge, 2 Latinos simultaneously on the court the first time in its history. an African American on the court, along with the two of us, the first openly gay member of the court. So really a lot of changes in the court, which I think are very positive. Certainly for the reason that Judge Garcia has mentioned, and others have mentioned, the public confidence that is necessary. But to the extent, I've spent a long time in my life in that civil rights area, it's also because it is a way to show that barriers are being broken. That is to say, the obstacles, the racism, the sexism that continues to be a barrier is beginning to fall, is beginning to be challenged. So it's not merely the public confidence, because I agree that that is the large share of this, but it is also a recognition that there has been an injustice that needs to be remedied, and that's what happens when you diversify our profession, the legal profession, and with respect to the conversation we're having now, the bench, the judiciary, that is about undoing what has gone wrong, not merely about ensuring that our communities are representative of everyone who's in them. That is true, that is singularly important, but sort of that sense of justice, I think, is also critical to the way we think about it. The other thing I would say is, and it'll be my last point on this, in addition to the numbers and what they mean, we also have to recognize that we continue to be at a place where we are seeking respect for each of us, as well as members of a Latino community. That is to say that members on the bench, women, people of color, Latinos, Latinas, we're all seeking to be treated with the respect that anyone would give to another judge who is not from our community. First of all, we don't want anyone to expect or to be surprised by the fact that we write very well. We're quite bright. We are actually able to render decisions that are cited and binding precedent. That is what we need. And I really do welcome the day when Judge Garcia and I will sit on that bench, and I will not be called Judge Garcia, not because that's not an honor, but because people will recognize that we're not exactly alike and that he won't be mistaken for Judge Rivera. Again, not because it's a sign of disrespect in the sense of I don't want to be associated with Judge Garcia, quite the contrary, but rather because it is an understanding that we will be given the respect we are due as individual judges. Yes, on occasion, a judge will a litigant, a lawyer will call a judge by an incorrect name. But we are not yet at the point where when one white male judge is called by another white male judge, that somehow has all of the history of oppression behind it. It doesn't. But when there's a misnaming, or when, as Judge Ciparick said, she's believed to be the secretary or the translator, interpreter, as opposed to a member of the profession, that is laden with the history of racism, sexism, oppression, colonialism when it comes to the Puerto Rican community that we're all so very much aware of. And so I think that is the other part, which is almost the harder part. I think it's easier to persuade people that numbers matter in a real sense. Sort of the example that I always give, I don't think people would think it's a representative bench if every person on the Court of Appeals was a Puerto Rican woman. I might feel very comfortable with it. I think we'd render some wonderful decisions, but I don't think anyone would say that's fully representative of the breadth of experience of New York, right? But I think it's harder to persuade someone that there are reasons why the bench needs to diversify along with our profession, because it has meaning behind numbers. And then every member of that profession, every judge on the court has to be treated based on the merits of what they bring without underestimating their abilities because of their ethnicity or sex, gender, right? But because of what they bring and how they add value and how they inform the development of the rule of law. Because as Judge Garcia has pointed out so brilliantly about Chief Judge K, she loved the law. she was deeply committed to the development of the rule of law. And I think all of us as judges want to be recognized for our ability to engage with that part of the judicial deliberative process in a way that is not limited by the fact that male, female, Puerto Rican, Cuban, some other Latino group, Dominican, excuse me, some other Latino group, or of any background, right? That's what at the end we want to persuade everyone to understand of the singular importance of our presence and what we bring to the bench.
Thank you, Judge Rivera. Thank you, Judge Garcia. We're at the end of the program, but I do want you to at least speak briefly about the future. What are the strategies to increase inclusiveness, eliminate bias, and enhance access to justice that can be implemented? I know you've addressed a little bit in the conversation, but what are these strategies that you believe? How important is it for the judiciary to reflect the diversity of the state's population? I believe you've answered that as well. And so just if you could briefly talk about what strategies do we have to increase that inclusiveness?
Maybe I'll go, Jen. But you know, in thinking about this, you look at the numbers and getting back to, you know, the point Judge Rivera made, I made, the numbers are better because anything's better than nothing, but more work to be done. But the numbers and appointments on the benches that are appointed positions are better than the elected positions in terms of diversity. And that's a tough one. You know, that's the electoral process, and that means recruiting candidates. And that's a world I don't know. I never experienced it. I never was in it, but it's so critical because of New York's judiciary and all of those positions, you know, county court, Supreme Court, that are elected. And then from there to the appellate division, you need to be an elected Supreme. How important it is for us to find those folks who are willing not only to serve, but to go through the process of, you know, an election. That's difficult. And again, I've never done it. So I see that one as one of the big challenges in New York for doing that. I think in terms of a general approach, it's something, you know, I don't know, just now at this stage of my career, you find out you've been doing this, all of a sudden you realize for a long time. And when that really hits home for me is in the last, I would say 5+ years, when I see these new lawyers coming, or as you mentioned, I go to law schools, and not only Albany, I go to other schools, as I know Judge Rivera does, and speak to different groups. You know, you realize that they, you know, as we've seen folks that were here and face these challenges that were so steep, you know, historically, and did so much work. I look at these students and younger, as Judge Rivera said, and they're going to face challenges different than the ones that we've seen before, and in ways incomprehensible to us. Like, it's just, you can't imagine what they're going to have to deal with. Look, we saw a brief, you know, terrible snapshot of that this past year. We don't know what those challenges will be, and how important it is now to reach out younger than law school to start, you know, imparting what we can and mentoring or guiding to the extent we can the generation that's going to have to really be at the forefront for that. That has struck me so much recently. And maybe it's just a function of working in such an intense environment with law clerks who for the most part are fairly junior lawyers, which raises different challenges. But, and thinking no longer are you, you know, all, you know, I think our professional lives, we, you know, you want to achieve, you want to do well, you're in this race. You do finally get to this point where you step back a little bit and you start to think about, you know, I'm not competing, I'm not, I have a different responsibility, and that's daunting, I think, one, but in a way it's been, you know, one of the things I love the most about this job on the Court of Appeals, because it does give you that ability to get out of the courthouse and to speak to bar associations and meet young, you know, junior lawyers out of law school, or to go to the schools and to listen to their issues and to try to help in some way to guide them. And you do feel, and Judge Rivera touched on this with Judge Sotomayor and Judge Kay, or with other folks that are, you owe that debt because those people did that for you, you know, that they reached out, and without the guidance of Judge Kay or David Siegel, I wouldn't have had the jobs or the opportunities I had. And what's our obligation to do that for others? Because you have such talented people out there facing, really now, look at this year, such adversity, and some of the issues we've discussed today that linger on and present challenges. You know, what is our obligation to do that? So I pretend not to have the answer to that, but I can really say that in the last few years, I've tried to make that effort to get out. And it's not only I find helpful, I hope, for the people you're speaking to at least hear maybe some of the things you've done that you would do differently, but also to listen to them and to hear kind of the issues they're facing in their starting out their careers. And it's eye-opening. And I will let Judge Rivera go. I don't want to monopolize it, but I will say I saw that also at a big law firm, where I saw, you know, some of the challenges faced by new associates coming out of law school into a big firm environment. And, you know, not necessarily within the firm, but in the practice of law, I saw issues. I saw, you know, things that you know, find repulsive in certain ways, and in the ways people are not overtly, but subtle things. And you still see that, and you still see, you know, in this, you know, 2015, 16, you know, see junior associates to, you know, having to deal with some of these issues. So I think there's so much work that still needs to be done. The hard thing is figuring out a way that you can be accessible and a valuable resource for those folks. But, you know, it's worth doing, because I always come back to that same thought, and I have it often now, that they are those people that are brand new, newly minted lawyers that, you know, we're thinking, oh, do they know how to do a bench memo? They're going to be the ones whose name is on the decisions at some point, or making those tough calls, who are, you know, and the more you can do to help them prepare for that, the better off, you know, everyone's going to be. So long, kind of maybe meandering answer, but.
Thank you, Judge Garcia. Thank you. Judge Rivera.
Yeah, no, those were some really good points. I agree. So I'll just make a few points because I know time is gone and there's not much left for me really to say. But maybe moving from the micro to the macro level, I agree that we need to support those who are coming up behind us, but even our contemporaries. And we can serve as mentors, but I think we also need to think about how we can serve as champions and who can be champions. There's a big difference between a mentor and a champion. You know, a champion basically puts their name behind you in a way that a mentor is, of course, helping you along the way, trying to give you guidance, but a champion is associating their name with you. And they rise and fall, and you rise and fall with them. And that's a very different position. And I think we need to look for more of those people, and we need to be those people ourselves for others. I think we need to also, each of us, and as bar associations, look for ways to create leadership opportunities for, as Judge Garcia is referring to, so the junior lawyers, as people are coming into the profession. Because that's what made the difference. When I had leadership opportunities or opportunities to shine, those were very stressful moments, but I really grew professionally as a result, and people got to know my work. And that's what, you know, makes hopefully a future judge on some other court, or the future head of Latino justice, or, you know, the future head of the president's task force on who knows what. And so that's really, really important, that we continue to push for, and we find ways for leadership opportunities for our junior lawyers, for law students, and those who are even thinking about the law. It's really critical that they get that opportunity. And then this is sort of my macro point, and it's sort of the vision that we take with it, I think. We need to really think of the changes that we're talking about, not purely as a question of diversity is a good thing. It is. This is not disputed amongst any member of the Puerto Rican Bar, and I think of anyone who's participating either as a panelist or observing today. But what we need to think about is, how do we make the project of improving the bench, improving our profession, having it be more diverse? How do we make that project about a remedy of past injustice? Because that's where it is. I think we've lost our way when we move to thinking about, okay, how do we right wrongs? How do we make sure things are just, to, oh, we want diversity because we think that's a good thing. It is a good thing, but it's also about a cure for a past that is just wrong. And right now, the country is, of course, in this moment where I think people are asking us all to be reflective and to think about how we can make the world much better than it has been in the past. And, you know, we'll see where that goes. But this is sort of my point. And when we're reflecting, we're thinking about not only how it could be better, but how do we get to a point where we're looking at numbers that are the same, as Judge Garcia points out, that Justice Acosta and many other people have mentioned. And I know Justice Sally Manzanet has done a wonderful numeric review of sort of where we are in New York City, both on the elected and the appointed side, and really shown the numbers for what they are. But, you know, what is it that got us to those numbers? Not only the good thing that got us from none to some, but what is it that got us to so few? What is going on there, and how can we address that? Again, as a social justice question, not merely as a question of, we want to make sure that that we're representative of communities. That is a social justice question, but something a little bit deeper. So I'll end it at that. And again, I want to thank the Historical Society of Puerto Rican Bar and everyone who's had their hand in making the program possible. And I do wish everyone and their families that you are all safe and staying healthy in this very difficult and challenging moment as we close off a very difficult COVID-19 year.
Thank you so much, Judge Rivera. Thank you so much, Judge Garcia. And I want to leave you with one word. Judge Benjamin Cardozo, the first Jewish judge on the New York State Court of Appeals, said, uniformity ceases to be a good when it becomes a uniformity of oppression. And a lot of people know that Judge Cardozo is a Sephardic Jew, Portuguese, but also could be Spanish. So I adopted him as a mentor a long time ago. And that is what diversity is if we empower each other, but also reach out to other communities and other groups and let them know that, listen, we're available. I'm available. I can be a law secretary. I can do this. I can do that. And that's one thing that I make a point of telling. When I sit on judicial screening panels, I ask the judges, I said, listen, do you have a minority law secretary? What outreach do you do to find staff in your chambers that's diverse? Because that's important. And sometimes you have to ask questions, the hard questions. And I never shy away from that. But thank you so much, everybody, thank you to all of the panelists for joining us this evening. You were all fabulous. A big round of applause to all of you. And also to the staff of the Historical Society of the New York Courts. Marilyn Marcus, Executive Director. What a wonderful Executive Director. We're so thankful for everything that you've done. Allison Morrissey, Joe Shukin, Danielle Sierra, Ricky Placeres, who helped with the video clips and who's Al Placeres' son and always produces all of our videos. This is just the beginning of a program that Steve Younger put in my brain a long time ago. Steve Younger, I thank you. My brother, you are my Puerto Rican brother. Grew up in the Lower East Side. Father was a minister. Your family has been involved with the Puerto Rican community for so long. And the main thing, Steve Younger, he was the one that increased diversity in the New York State Bar Association. Because of Steve Younger, I am the first Puerto Rican chair of the trial lawyers section of the New York State Bar Association. And I don't take that lightly. I make a difference. I make sure all panelists on any programs are diverse, and I include everyone. So that's what we have. That's the message I want to give to you today. Steve, I really applaud you. Patterson Belknap, Ehab Sadiq, thank you for all the technical, beautiful work. And thank you everyone for joining us.